Long before the Romans marched under their eagle banners, I slept in the dark, silent heart of the Judean mountains. I was a massive block of white limestone, awakened by the sharp strike of iron chisels. Master builders, commissioned by King Herod, cut me from the earth to serve a grand purpose. I was transported with agonizing effort to the highest plateau in Jerusalem. There, they laid me down. I became the foundational cornerstone of the great temple. For decades, I bore the immense, crushing weight of cedar beams, marble pillars, and gold-plated doors. I anchored the courts where millions of pilgrims walked. The high priests, with their fine linen garments and jeweled breastplates, paced above me. The builders looked upon the temple and boasted of their unparalleled craftsmanship. They believed this structure of stone and mortar was the ultimate dwelling place of the divine. Yet, despite their architectural genius, they were spiritually blind. They revered the stones they could see, measure, and polish, but they had forgotten the prophecies of old. They forgot that the Most High does not dwell in temples made by human hands. I was merely a shadow, a physical placeholder, waiting for the true foundation to arrive. My silent existence was a countdown to the day the architect of the universe would step into his own courts, clothed not in gold, but in mortal flesh.
Decades passed in the rhythmic smoke of daily sacrifices. Then he arrived. He did not enter with the royal procession of a conquering king, nor did he command the temple guard. He came in dusty sandals, a carpenter from the obscure hills of Galilee. His name was Jesus. When he walked into the temple courts, a strange resonance passed through my limestone core. It was a frequency older than the earth itself, the vibration of the word that had spoken all matter into existence. I, the unfeeling stone, felt the undeniable presence of my Maker. He stood in the courtyards and taught the multitudes with an authority that left the scholars speechless. He did not merely quote the law, he embodied it. When he saw the temple turned into a marketplace of greed, his righteous anger flared. He drove out the money changers, overturning their heavy tables. "My house shall be called a house of prayer," he declared, his voice echoing through the grand colonnades. The priests and scribes watched him with narrowing eyes. They were the self-appointed stewards of this holy place, the builders of Israel's faith. Yet as they listened to him, they felt their power threatened. They looked at the true cornerstone, the perfect living foundation meant to uphold humanity, and they found him unsuitable for their grand designs. The great rejection had begun.
The tension within the temple walls grew thick and venomous. The Pharisees, Sadducees, and chief priests began to weave a web of conspiracy. They cornered him in the courts, hurling complex theological traps to discredit him before the crowds. Yet, with calm wisdom, Jesus dismantled their snares, exposing the hypocrisy hidden beneath their robes of righteousness. He looked directly at these proud leaders and told them a parable about a vineyard, ending with a piercing truth. The stone that the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. I rested silently beneath the pavement, bearing witness to their fatal error. These master builders of religion were inspecting the living stone, measuring him against their warped plumb lines of tradition and political ambition. Because he did not fit their expectation of a militaristic Messiah who would crush Rome, they tossed him aside. They chose their beautiful temporary temple of limestone over the eternal temple of grace. In the dark of night, the betrayal was finalized for 30 pieces of silver. The builders condemned the architect. They handed him over to the Roman authorities, demanding his execution. The crowds that had once shouted for his kingship were manipulated into crying out for his blood. The true cornerstone was dragged away to be crushed. It was the day before the Sabbath. From my place beneath the temple, I could not see the hill of Golgotha, but I felt the agony of creation. At midday, the sun refused to shine. A heavy, suffocating darkness blanketed Jerusalem for 3 hours. The natural world was mourning the suffering of its creator, who was now pinned to a wooden beam by iron nails. Then he breathed his last. The moment his spirit departed, a violent, deafening roar tore through the foundations of the earth. It was not a natural earthquake. It was a cosmic convulsion of grief. The ground heaved violently. Deep within the temple structure, the massive stones ground against one another, groaning under the sheer force of the tremor. Above me, the massive, beautifully woven curtain that separated the Holy of Holies from the rest of the temple, thick enough to stop a chariot, was ripped violently in two, from top to bottom. The barrier between humanity and the divine was destroyed. I felt the physical fractures in my own limestone body. The physical temple was rendered obsolete in a single agonizing moment. The builders had succeeded in killing him, but in doing so, they had triggered the ultimate sacrifice that would establish a new foundation for the world.
Following the violent upheaval, a profound and terrifying silence fell upon Jerusalem. The Sabbath began, but it was a day stripped of its joy, cloaked in confusion and sorrow. The disciples were scattered, hiding behind locked doors, their hopes seemingly buried in a rich man's rock-hewn tomb. Beneath the temple, the physical stones settled into an uneasy stillness. The torn veil hung in the desolate sanctuary, flapping gently in the wind, exposing an empty room. The priests hurried to repair the damage, desperate to maintain the illusion that their system was still intact, that their authority remained unbroken. They sealed the tomb and posted guards, trying to lock away the truth in darkness. But the silence of that Saturday was not the silence of defeat. It was the hushed pause before a dawn that would rewrite the laws of the universe. The true cornerstone lay in the cold earth, resting. In that subterranean darkness, the final battle over sin and death was being waged quietly, invisibly. The builders thought they had discarded the stone permanently into the rubble of history, unaware that the foundation was simply taking its final position.
Before the sun could break over the Mount of Olives on Sunday morning, a new vibration pulsed through the earth. It was not the destructive, grieving tremor of Friday. This was a steady, radiating pulse of pure, unadulterated life. The massive stone rolled away from the tomb, not to let Jesus out, but to let the witnesses in. Death could not hold the author of life. The cornerstone that had been rejected, condemned, and buried was suddenly radiantly alive. He stepped out of the grave, leaving behind the linen wrappings of mortality. As the news of the empty tomb spread through the city like wildfire, the spiritual architecture of the world shifted forever. The physical temple in which I rested was no longer the center of God's presence. Jesus was building a new sanctuary, not constructed from lifeless limestone or dead cedar, but from living stones, human hearts transformed by his grace. He became the indestructible, immovable foundation of a church that would span continents and centuries. The builder's ultimate rejection had become God's ultimate victory. Decades later, the words of Jesus came to pass. The Roman legions surrounded Jerusalem. In the year 70 AD, fires consumed the glorious cedar roofs of the temple. Roman soldiers, driven by greed for the melted gold seeping between the blocks, used iron levers to pry my brothers and me from our resting places. Not one stone will be left upon another, he had promised, and he was right. My physical form was toppled, cast down into the Tyropoeon Valley, left as broken rubble in the dust of history.
The grand building that the religious elite had so fiercely protected was erased from the skyline. But the true cornerstone remains. Empires have risen and fallen to ash. Armies have marched and centuries have turned. Yet the foundation he laid in his resurrection stands completely unshaken. He holds the weight of human sorrow, anchors the hope of the desperate, and builds a spiritual house that no fire can burn and no army can dismantle. I was only a piece of rock destined to crumble. He is the eternal rock of ages, the living cornerstone, crying out a message of grace to the ends of the earth.